Surveying is a process of critical observation as much as it is one of measuring. Turning up, taking a picture and leaving is tourism. To survey, you need to look, understand and document what you see. It's important to remember that a survey needs to capture the attributes of a site's qualities as much as its quantities. Before you go, try and find out as much about your site as you can. It's a good practice to arrive for a survey with some familiarity and understanding of the site. For example, use Street View, see when the site will be busy or quiet, get an idea of the public opinion about your site. Or you could look at the site on Google Maps to orientate yourself. Come prepared, have your phones charged up, fully charged batteries in your camera if you bring one. Bring paper, but don't underestimate how much paper you might need. You could use a hardback sketchbook, but sometimes free sheets are more practical. You want to work at A3 if possible. It can help to have a clipboard to store the papers and to lean on as you measure and draw when you're walking around. You can get them for about £5 on Amazon, or if you can get hold of one, a laser measure would be really useful. Check if you need protective equipment on the site before you go. Make sure you're aware of any health and safety requirements and read any risk assessments. Be careful on site. If possible, it's always best to survey in pairs, especially if you're in an old or unstable building or you're working in lost spaces, etc. Use your judgment on what is safe to survey. Check the weather and come prepared. You don't always get more than one chance to visit a site, so don't let the weather spoil things for you. Rain and a lot of paper sketches aren't good friends, and standing around outside all day can get really quite chilly. When you arrive with plenty of time. You don't want to rush a survey and potentially miss crucial details which would mean you'd have to return at a later date. Stand back and take it all in. How do people use it? How does the site feel to you? Note these things down before you forget and before you start measuring. Think about what's important about the site to you. Have a look around, helps you understand how the site works, what door leads where the sun's coming up and going down, where the shadows fall, what time is it, what lies around the site. Here is a list of relevant factors that you could take into consideration when you wander. This PowerPoint will be available online, so you can copy these lists out when you need. Sketches. Once you've had a look around, sketch the site from different angles. Draw how you imagine it to look from a bird's eye view as a plan. Sketch the different walls of the building as flat, face on as you can. Be sure to draw these big enough that you can write measurements on them. The sketches don't need a huge amount of detail. You are using them to locate the measurements and not recreate a pictorial record of what the site looks like. That's what your pictures and videos will be for. Record all the information you take from the survey so that it makes sense to you later on. Draw your sketches proportionately and carefully, although this will come easier the more you do. Here you can see how the features like the door are the same size in both drawings, and the drawing already feels measurable even though it's only a sketch. If you come across an area that is technical or difficult to present in your drawing, note it, like a cross-reference, and then draw it on a separate sheet or a page at a larger scale so that you can get more detail in and the measurements are clearer. Develop a system where you use different colours for different types of information. One for basic measurements, one for heights and vertical measurements, and another for architectural details like windows or doors. This helps to make sense of the drawing when you get back to the studio and you'll have lots of numbers floating around on a page. When you're drawing the sketches, draw your sketch with care and attention. Remember your sketch is for measurements and not for a gallery. Keep your sketches in proportion. Draw your sketches big enough to write measurements in. Draw complicated and important details bigger. Use different colours for different measurements. Write clearly. Photographs. Take pictures all the time, from everywhere, near and far, from the furthest corner down the street as well as up close. Photos from far away can be helpful for creating street views of your proposed design, and they can be useful for planning consent or to give you context. Hold your camera straight and perpendicular to the ground. Always try to capture images as if you were going to tile them later on. Don't be a random paparazzi. Try and take pictures with people in the space, and this gives instant scale, and it also gives potential context for in future drawings and in habitation. Photograph details, awkward corners and things from different angles. As well as measuring, try to draw these, sketch out how they work and are put together, write down what they are made of, take a rubbing, anything that helps to capture the information for later. Use something to put into your photos for scale, especially when taking pictures of details. A 30cm ruler is great for this, but could you also use anything that could be measured later, like a Coke can or a biro pen. It is really important to download your photos from your phone or camera. Organise your photos into most obvious folders as you can, outside, inside, front door, back door, etc. and print any of the key most relevant ones to help with drawing and measuring as you continue down the road. Taking pictures. Take pictures all the time from all places and angles. Hold the camera straight to tile your photos. Contextualise your photos with Coke cans and people. Download and organise your photos. Measurements. Be systematic when you survey. For example, ideally start your measuring at a chosen point, like a corner or a doorway, and continue in a clockwise or anti-clockwise direction all the way around the site till you return. Although you should start by taking the longest measurements you can, to reduce the chances of mistakes, you will need to take running measurements as well as overall length. If you only take small individual dimensions, constantly adding up little bits at a time, it will lead to inaccuracies. If you can work in pairs, one of you can take the measurements and the other one note them down. If you work this way, read out the measurements clearly as individual numbers, 1, 5, 7, 8, rather than 1,578. Measurements are made in millimetres on surveys, and with the scale we are working to in this brief, a tolerance of plus or minus 5 millimetres is okay. If you can't measure something because it's too high or out of reach, then match it up with something. Measure a brick, then count the amount of bricks going across. Measure a person on the ground, then count how many of them you can imagine climbing on top of each other. Sometimes try and look or photograph the site from a distance to see if your building can be compared with something else that could be measured. A street light with standard measured height, a passing double-decker bus, a block of flats where the floors are the same height, for example. Take your measurements at a height that registers important features like windows. Usually this is about 1 metre high and is a standard in surveying. Watch out, as it is more than likely that the ground level will not be level. When measuring heights, take a constant feature from the surface of the building, for example windowsill or a damp-proof course, and measure down to the ground from this point, all the way around the building, and upwards from this point. Be sure to take diagonal measurements to help cross-reference dimensions later on and to calculate angles through triangulation. Measure the structural openings of windows and doors, and then measure the frames as details separately. Look for repetitions so you don't remeasure the same thing again and again. Internal doors and frames tend to be the same. Architectural details tend to be copies of one another. Most staircases have the same riser and tread measurements for each of their stairs. In measuring, be methodical. Work from one point and go round in one direction. Use running measurements. Work in millimetres. Measure horizontally from waist height. Measure vertically from the building, not the ground. Use diagonals to cross-reference your measurements. Use what you can to make the job easier, such as repetitions or standards. Thanks and good luck.